Welcome! Thanks for joining me. Today, in this video, I want to make the Earth. And there's been a lot of Earth tutorials out there. The one I'm pretty much going to follow is going to be the one from Blender Guru that makes the Earth in Blender cycles. This one right here, and if you go to his website, there are some textures that you can download and use to make your Earth. I'm not going to use these. Sometimes you just want to change it up. But we want to take a look at the textures we're going to need to gather in order to make our Earth. The first one is going to be the color Albedo, which is essentially the picture of the Earth. Then we're going to have a bump map, which is going to be kind of like the elevation of different terrains across the Earth, also called Typography. We're going to have the clouds map, the ocean mask, and I'm not going to use the nightlights map, but whatever your goal is, you might need it, you might not. As he says, all textures are from NASA, and they've been resized. You may have to do that, but images and textures from NASA are free, and so if we go to NASA's Visible Earth, we can see that they have a bunch of different stuff. What we're looking for pretty much are these flat maps. And so the first one that I can immediately see is Typography, this black and white shades of gray image. That's going to be our bump map. This one I actually did reduce to 5400 by 2700 because it is quite large, but you don't have to do that, and it gives you a better look depending on your goal if you use the higher resolution image. The next one that I immediately see is the ocean mask, this bathymetry. I'm going to use that one for the ocean mask. And then you can choose any of these others for your picture of the crust itself. I think I'm going to select this one. And then the last one that we have left is the clouds map. So if we go off into page 2 and scroll down a little bit, it's right there, the blue marble clouds. I haven't looked at this Earth city lights, but that might be the one you might need for the night lights. At either rate, it's time to get started. So I'm using version 2.83.0. Our moment in Blender history, I think we are at version 2.83.3 as far as a long-term release, and 2.9 has just entered beta. So let's start a new project. First thing I'm going to do is enable the screencast keys so that you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to get rid of this cube. So hit X and commit that delete. The next thing I want to do is either go up here, add mesh UV sphere, or Shift A. I don't really like this, but my menu down here disappeared as soon as I clicked off the object. But I haven't applied anything to it, so I can bring that menu back by hitting Shift 9. So I'm going to take it up to 64 segments and 32 rings. Click on our sphere here and hit Shade Smooth. I like that, but I'm still going to add a Subdivision Surface modifier. So going to the wrench, add modifier, Subdivision Surface. And I'm going to go ahead and apply it. I've done this a number of times. This works for me. And I don't want to forget about doing it later. The next thing I want to do is change from Eevee to cycles. And we'll change these settings later. I don't need anything super high resolution. I just want it to look like an Earth. Now, our layers are going to be Earth, clouds, and atmosphere. So we got 3 layers, 4 pictures. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift D. Escape. I'm going to scale it by hitting S 1.03 on the number pad, enter. Now's a good time to start labeling stuff. So our first layer is going to be the earth. The second layer is going to be the clouds. And then we have one more layer. So make sure our clouds is selected. Hit Shift D, escape, and scale it S. This one I'm going to do by 1.07 just because the atmosphere actually goes out even further than the moon, which means it's much further away from the earth than the clouds are. And relabel that, and we've got our 3 layers. So the next thing to do would be to add textures. I'm going to move some stuff out of my way. And make my earth a little bit bigger. I do not want to see the atmosphere. I do not want to see the clouds. I want to focus on the earth. Go to where my textures are. And let's add a new material. Since we're working on the earth, let's label it earth. And I want to change this principled BSDF to a diffuse BSDF. So while it is selected, and only it is selected, hit Shift S, shader, diffuse. I'm going to move these 2 over. We got some room, why not? And make it a little bit bigger, just so that we can see what's going on. I'm going to pull this one, just this one, over here a little bit, because we have 3 images going into this. We have our earth texture that goes into the color. We're going to have our bump map, that typography that we changed to non-color data. Going to make that one collapse so that we can see what we're doing here. Non-color data we need to add, because this is a black and white image or even a color image, doesn't really matter as long as it's not one of those purple ones. We have to add a bump map, vector, bump, color to height, normal to normal. And if we zoom in real close here, we can see the difference. No bump, bump. And so you can change that however you want. It doesn't change the geometry, it just adds fake detail. So now that we got that going on, the next thing to do would be to add the ocean mask. Also non-color data. And we've got nowhere to plug this in at, so we need to create a new space. Shader, mix shader, and we're going to take this ocean mask and plug it into the factor. Now the Blender Guru adds an invert node, color invert, but it doesn't work with this particular mask, so we're going to leave it out. Well, we still have this other socket down here we need to deal with, and so we'll add our other 3 nodes. Shader, mix shader, we're going to add a Fresnel node, which is input Fresnel. And it's going to help us kind of, when the light shines, when the camera shines directly on a space, it'll have a different effect. And the glossy shader, is going to go into this bottom socket right here. That Fresnel is actually going to go into the factor. And this diffuse is going to go down here and fill in that gap. So let's move this down, expand it, expand this one, get a look at our setup. And that completes the Earth. So the next thing we want to do is we want to go into the clouds and make sure our clouds is selected, and it is. Add new. Change this to a BSDF, sorry, a diffuse BSDF, Shift S. You could do a lot of this with the principal BSDF, it's just easier to do it this way. And then add a input, layer weight, and we got nowhere to plug that into. And then add a transparent node, shader, transparent, nowhere to plug that into. And we want our clouds, that texture, and we can plug that one into the diffuse. And now we can't see our Earth at all. We've got the clouds, but there's no Earth. So we'll have to fix that. In order to plug all these into this material output, we need a mix shader. 500 ways to solve a problem. This is just one. We want the transparent in the first shader node, the diffuse in the second shader node, the layer weight facing into the factor node, and we're not seeing anything. We're on cycles, and the question would be why not? And that's because we're in look dev mode and we need to go into render view mode. So yeah, because of the Fresnel, you don't really see the clouds here because the camera and all that's facing right at it, but you can see off to the side these clouds. If you wanted to add a little bit of bump, or if you wanted to hide the Earth altogether so you can see the clouds a little bit better, whatever you want. I don't really care that much about the clouds, but if you want to give the clouds a little bit more detail as seen from above, Shift A, vector, because this is an image, bump map, plug that into the normal of the diffuse BSDF, and the color into the height of the bump. The bump on this is pretty significant, so if it were me, I would lower that, and that's where we are. Bring that Earth back, and let's rename this, and there we go. That takes care of our cloud layer. We're left with the atmosphere. Alright, so unhide the atmosphere, make sure we have that selected, and we do. Add a new material. Do the same thing we did with the clouds pretty much. Shift S to change that to diffuse BSDF. Add a mix shader, Shift A, shader, mix shader, and we want that in the bottom socket. We need shader, transparent, and make sure that one's all the way up, and it is. This one, change to any color that you like for the atmosphere. And I'm just going to take that all the way up as well. And then the next thing is the layer weight. Shift A, input, layer weight. Facing to factor. And bring that way down. I want to see it, but I don't want to see much of it. And there we go. I'm going to go back to the layout view, move my light. So select it, just because it's behind my earth and I don't want it there. Number pad 3 gets you to the side, number pad 1 gets you front view, or you can hit the tilde key and go to any one of these. You can go to the front, you can go to the back, the top, right, left, view camera, view selected, view bottom. So if you don't want to keep hitting the number pad, you can do all these. I'm just used to doing the number pad. I like to be able to see what I'm doing. And if you're quick enough, you can, and you know where you're going, you can do it pretty quick. So I'm going to move that over and down. And there we go. There's our Earth. If you wanted to, you can do the same thing. Let's see our size here. Our size is 1. So if I hit Shift A, UV sphere, move it over, shade smooth, got to click on it, shade smooth, and then scale it by 0.25, because the moon is about the quarter of the size of the Earth, maybe a little bit less. And then let's add a subsurf to it, subdivision surface modifier. The moon is inclined relative to the Earth. Go to shading. You can get textures for the moon from NASA's Scientific Visualization Studio, the CGI Moon Kit. There's only 2 things here. There's the essentially the color map, and there's a displacement map. You download those, drag them in. This is the image. And while we're here, just hit Control A for scale, and then bring in our other one, which says displacement in the title. Change that to non-color. And always go to the settings area, right about where the settings area is. And if you're using the displacement, make sure it at least says displacement, because sometimes it won't. But there's our moon. The next thing to do would be to make sure we save it. Always save it. Earth 1, save. And the next thing to do would be to render out an image. So you can either go here and change your background to dark, really dark, whatever. Maybe import an image as a background. Images as planes. You'd have to set up that node in the edit preferences. Images as planes. And then you can do image as plane, because if you just do it as, like a reference or something like that, it won't show up in the render. There's a lot of good sky textures out there. Do what you like. Make it dark, or sometimes what I like to do is I like to make it transparent. So here under the render properties, if you go down to film, you can make the background transparent, and it'll actually render transparent provided you keep it in the PNG format. So there's that. I like to uncheck hair if I'm not using hair. Simplify under the render settings too. I'm going to change my render down to 32. And under performance, I've done a lot of tests. What seems to work for me is a render tile size of 32 by 32. We need to set up our camera. I'm not opposed to this particular angle. So Control Alt number pad 0. I can move it around by hitting N to bring up this menu off to the side here. Go down to View and click Lock Camera to View. And so if I want to rotate it or anything like that, I can do so. The bigger your image is in the viewport, the longer it's going to take to render. But I'm okay with this view. So now I'm just going to render the image. Alright, it's done. I'm liking everything except for this should be a little bit bluer. I don't care for that. But otherwise, I'm pretty happy with it. Hope you are too. So the next thing we need to do is we need to save our image. Save image as Earth 1. And there we go. Alright, if you found this informative, liked it, hit like, subscribe, join me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. But next thing we need to do is get into rotating our Earth, doing a little bit of animation. Alright, see you then.